So here we are. Right. So last week we spoke about, before we jump into the next pasuk, pasuk Memvav. Last week we spoke about the previous two psukim, that is to say Mem Dalid and Mem Hey. And we spoke a few points, which I just want to add one thing about that. That Yosef, Paro said to Yosef, Ani Paro, and you have the right to stop everyone, arrest anyone's freedom of motion. And therefore, when Yosef utilized that power that Paro gave him by arresting his brothers, he said Chei Paro twice, because it's through the power of Ani Paro that he's vested with the ability to arrest people. That's regular. It means without your permission, no one can move a hand or foot. It means you could tell people whether they have freedom of motion. So here Yosef is swearing by Paro. Paro is the one who the story begins. Paro considers himself a god, and he's on the Or, and so it's sort of like Yosef is swearing by Elohim Acher. And we spoke about also that Paro naming Yosef Tzafas Baneach, which is an Egyptian word, the meaning of which we don't know. The point of that is Hagufa, that look, Yosef is interacting with this foreign people whose language is foreign, as the pasuk says in Talmud that the Eshma. And Keneged this, as we said last week, Keneged this in Yeshaya Perek Yutes, where it talks about, which is Keneged this parsha, and there it talks about the 5 cities in Mitzrayim that will speak Sfas Canaan and Nishboyis Lashem Tzavakas. Fine. So it means here where Yosef is interacting with the Sfas Loyadati, Sfas Mitzrayim, and he swears by Chei Paro, which is the opposite of swearing by Hashem Tzavakas, because Paro is the anti-Hashem. Right? He says, Loyadati is Hashem, me Hashem. Okay, what we spoke about last week, this you have to listen to last week's shir. There the pasuk says Ir HaHeres Yomer La'echos. One of them is being called Ir HaHeres. Ir HaHeres is Oin. The city Oin is Beis Shemesh, which is Ir HaHeres. That's what we spoke about last week. Okay, what I wanted to add was that there's another marker for this connection, which is an Amos Perek Ches. Amos Seif Perek Ches, where it talks about the hunger, which is actually a hunger l'shmoya dvar Hashem, not a rav l'lechem, and that's, as we've discussed in the past, that's the hunger in Mitzrayim, which is really, on a deeper level, what we're really worried about is the fact that it's a hunger dvar Hashem. On a deeper level, it's a hunger dvar Hashem, because as it says in Tehillim Lamed Gimel, b'dvar Hashem shamayim na'asu, and therefore, how does it go again? Sheker hasus, right? Meaning, since everything is made by the Dvar Hashem, so therefore if there's something going wrong, that means there's something about the Dvar Hashem that we're not interacting well with. So we need Yira, right? So that's what it says in Amos Perek Ches. It talks about the Rav. We spoke about the Perek numerous times, and there it says that the Rav is really a Rav l'shmoya Dvar Hashem. And let's look at the last two psukim there, and those last two psukim are miramas to Yosef, who's stuck in Mitzrayim and working with Mitzrayim, and in fact swears by Paro. Pasuk Yud Gimel, Perek Ches Pasuk Yud Gimel, Amos Bayemahu tis alafna habesulos hayofis v'habachurim batzama hanishbaim ba'asma shoymrim v'amru chele hechadon v'chederech b'shava v'raflu lo'ikumu oid. So that's the problem. The besulos hayofis and the bachurim, which you can take if you wish as a remes to Yosef, they are suffering from tzama, because they're part of this rav l'shmoya dvar Hashem. They don't really have the dvar Hashem, and they have a rav, and that's because they swear b'asma shoymram, and it repeats it 3 times, chei lehechadon and chei derech b'shava. So they're swearing by the Zaveh. So Yosef, and therefore nafav lo kumoid. Nafav lo kumoid, by the way, takes us back to the beginning, to Perek Hey and Amos, where it talks about nafav lo Yosef kum b'sulas Yisrael, and it says, watch out, pen yitzlach ka'esh beis Yosef v'achal ve'ed mechabe. So Yosef is at risk of having this permanent nefila, and because he swears ba'ashmas shemri. So that confirms that Yosef's engagement with Mitzrayim, which is on the terms of Pare, and is expressed in Yosef's mouth by Chei Pare, is this problem that he's not swearing Lashem Tzavakis. One day there will be 5 cities in Mitzrayim that do swear Lashem Tzavakis. Okay?
So this is a continuation of Shlem Pare.
Yeah, it's all because of Shlem Pare. This is nothing to do about it, right? That's right. Right. Okay. Pasuk Mevav. V'Yosef ben Shloshim Shana be'amdoi Lefnei Pare Melech Mitzrayim. V'Yetze Yosef from Lefnei Pare v'Ya'avor b'chol Eretz Mitzrayim. Okay. So Yosef was 30 years old when he was Oimid Lefnei Pare. So in this pasuk, there's introduced a new term over here of Amida Lefnei Pare. Twice, right? He's 30 years old when he's Oimid Lefnei Pare, and he's Yotze from Lefnei Pare. So he's in the presence of Pare. So there's this being in the standing before Pare, which we find also this concept, find in numerous places, but one specifically that's related to our parasha, the meaning the concept of being in the audience of a king. It's not just a casual thing. It's called Amida Lefanov. But also, not just that, it's not just an audience is called Amida Lefanov, but also having a position in the court is called Amida Lefanov. And that we find by a king, and that we find in Daniel, Seif Parak Aleph, and of course the parallels between Daniel and Yosef have been explored numerous times. Daniel is also successful in a king's court, and specifically in his ability to interpret dreams. And there it says in Daniel, Seif Parak Aleph, Pasuk Yotes, V'loy nimtza mikulam kedaniel Hanani Mishav Azai v'ya'amdu lefnei hamelech. Right? So hanimtzach hazeh ish asher ruach Elokim bay, and Yosef is the only one that has the ruach Elokim, and he's the one who's nimtza. He's discovered there too, who was nimtza Daniel Hanani Mishav Azai, and they were ya'amdu lefnei hamelech. So ya'amdu lefnei hamelech doesn't just mean that they had a one-time audience with the king, right? It means a position of power in the king's court of Srara. So too over here, where it talks about Yosef and Shloshim Shana, ba'amdoi lefnei Pare Melech Mitzrayim, doesn't just mean when he had an audience. It means when he had this position to be a member of Pare's court, and that's why it continues. Vayetze Yosef lefnei Pare, vayavor b'chol Eretz Mitzrayim, meaning it's the execution of his position, which is described as Amid lefnei Pare. What's his position? To take that authority that comes from the king's court and go out into the land, and then go do his arrangements. And as Pare told him, so then the pasuk is telling us, okay, here Yosef got a new position, and that's what the pasuk is saying. His age, one level, pasuk is telling us his age, because Yosef now got a new position. His position is Omdei Lefnei Pare, and he was 30 years old. Okay. Significantly, also, the Rashbam says that he's 30 years old, so now he's worthy of his position. The story starts Yosef ben Shvar Shana. He's already dreaming about being a king, and there's some problems with that, and he has to unlearn the hindrances of him being able to be a good king, as we've been discussing as we go through the parashas. Now that he's 30, he is mature and ready for the position of being Oimid Lefnei Pare. Okay, now there's another case of an Amida Lefnei Pare and a Yetzirah from Pare, and that is by Ya'akov. Ya'akov is also Oimid Lefnei Pare, or Mu'amad Lefnei Pare. This is in Perek Mem Zayin. Vayova Yosef es Ya'akov v'ya'amidei Lefnei Pare v'yivarech Ya'akov es Pare v'yomer Pare Ya'akov. Also, there's something about his age. Kami yemei shnei chayecha, and the age is, interestingly enough, 130. So Yosef is 30 when he's Oimid Lefnei Pare. And Yaakov says to Pare, and Yaakov blesses Pare, Vayetze Lefnei Pare. So Yosef is Oimid Lefnei Pare, 30 years old, and then he's Yotze from Pare, Lefnei Pare. Yaakov is also Vayamidei Lefnei Pare. He's 130, and then he's Yotze Lefnei Pare. But there's a much greater significance, because in both cases, they're dealing with the hunger. Yosef was 30 when he comes to Pare and says, there's a hunger coming, don't worry about it. We're going to arrange that the 7 years of Sava should prepare ahead so that the Eretz doesn't get decimated during the Rav. And Yaakov gives Pare a bracha, and the Rav is over. Because I'll say that the Rav was only 2 years instead of 7 years, because whatever the evidence of that is, I don't remember offhand what the evidence is, why they say that. But that comes from the bracha of Yaakov. So Yosef and Yaakov both had an audience with Pare, Amidah Lefnei Pare, and both of them gave their eitzes for the Rav. Yosef gave a very elaborate and technical and practical eitzah, and Yaakov gave a blessing, and the Rav was over. Right? Okay, so now let's think about this. I think it's very fascinating, the parallels. Yosef is 30 and Yaakov is 130, right? So, what's significant about being 30? Ben Shloshim L'Koyach. Wait, I'll prove it to you. Okay, you're making faces. Ben Shloshim L'Koyach. Just in case, I was going to hold off on this raya, but since you want a raya, take a look. Go back to Daniel in the even Lifnei Pharah. Right, we'll see. Take a look when the king asked his Ashpenaz, the chief of the Sarisim, to bring him some children, some youths that are capable of serving in his court. So look at Pasuk Dalad there. So they have to be good looking and they have to be wise. Okay, so like Yosef. In order to be oimin in the Heichal HaMelech, you need koyach. Okay? So Yosef, who's Amda Lefnei Pare, is the most perfect age for that, because he's Ben Shloshim. In order to be Oymen Beichel HaMelech, you need to have koyach. As it says, I think this is the best makar. I mean, maybe there's other ones for Ben Shloshim LeKoyach, because in order to be Oymen Beichel HaMelech, as Yosef and Daniel were, you have to have koyach, and Yosef was Ben Shloshim. Yosef, right? Doesn't say. But by Yosef it says, so therefore we infer that the pasuk is telling us, look, Yosef is that perfect age to be Oymed Beichel HaMelech, and I'll show you the more, because Yaakov was not Oymed Lefnei Pare. Vaya'amidehu. Why? Because he's an old man. He doesn't have koyach. Dafka the pasuk says Yaakov did not have koyach. Yaakov Pare says to him, how old are you? He says, I'm 130. It's a bad life, because they bring him in, they prop him up. So Yosef is Oymed Lefnei Pare when he's 30. Yaakov is not Oymed Lefnei Pare. Lefnei Pare like this, one person on each side, and he's 130. Okay, now, very significant. Very, very significant. So we have Yosef, who comes to Pare with a very elaborate, energy-intensive scheme of a capable manager who's going to be Yoitzel at Mitzrayim, and very busy, right? Yosef is all over the place. He's coming with an energetic 30-year-old man who's going to solve the problem with his genius. And then we have Yaakov's solution, who doesn't have koyach, not a ben shloshim, he's a ben meir ben shloshim, and his solution is, I'll give you a bracha and the rov's going to go away. Okay, now I'll show you, right? Which is a better solution. I'll show you how. Take a look at Mizmor Kuf Mem Zayin. Of course, you know it by heart. But we'll look at the psukim inside. It says in Mizmor Kuf Mem Zayin, which is all about this story, and I refer you to the previous year for that. But here we'll see some of the Ramazim. So it talks about, let's see, we could start from Mechas Hashemayim Ba'afim HaMeichin Lo'atzmot. Hashem makes it rain, and Hashem gives the food to the animals. Right? So Hashem takes care of the rain. Loi b'gvuras hasus yechbot, loi b'sheikah ish yirtzeh. Right? Hashem is yirev z'machem l'chastei. Hashem doesn't care for might, the horse, or the man. Rather, yirev hamyachel l'chastei. This, of course, is similar to the other mizmor referenced earlier, where in Mizmor Lamed Gimel, where it says Sheker Hasus l'Shua v'Chilei Lo'imalit Hinei Ein Hashem Alirev L'Chol Chastei for what? L'Hatzli Mos Nafsham L'Chayosem Barav. Right. So here too, the pasuk Ches and Tes talks about the fact that Hashem makes it rain and gives out the food, and then if you want food, you don't need power, not the sus, not the shokeish, rather Yireav. They're the ones who are going to get the food from Hashem. They're the ones who are going to receive the food from Hashem. Right. Not the sus, and of course, sus Mitzrayim is notable for its susim. Shabachi Yerushalayim as Hashem. Now it says, okay, who's going to receive the bounty and the blessing of the lechem? Yerushalayim and Tzion. Ki chizak b'richei shareich b'rich b'nayim kevach hasam gevulech shalom chidav chitim yas b'eich. Where does the Shalom go, and where does the Chelev Chita? To Yerushalayim. Not like Yosef, who guaranteed Shalom Parai, Vayachileu me Chelev Chita, he gave it to the enemies, right? The enemies of Yerushalayim. Here it's saying, no. You know who receives the Chelev Chitim? Yerushalayim. Okay, so now I want to say like this, Pasha, what's happening here? The pasuk is saying that that look, there's a Rav, right? So there's two ways to deal with the Rav. Yosef's way of dealing with it was Gvuras Hasus and B'Shoika Ha'ish. He could deal with this. He could make a plan. It's going to be very intensive. For 7 years, we're going to be planning and preparing for this for 7 years. And that's fine. That works. But there's a major difference between what Yosef does and what Yaakov does. Because Yaakov says, there is no Rav. Why is there no Rav? Because I'm Yaakov. And I'm Yirei Hashem. Right? Either was a Rav, now let's just figure this out. Either was a Rav for the last 2 years, and Yaakov didn't stop the Rav for the last 2 years. Why didn't Yaakov stop? If Yaakov could stop the Rav when he comes to Mitzrayim, the answer is because Yaakov wasn't Yaakov. He didn't have the Ruach. Right? What? V'atachi Ruach Yaakov. So now he says, don't worry, there's no Rav anymore because I'm here, because I'm Yaakov. I have the Ruach. And Magid Devarav Yaakov, Chukov Mishpat of Yisrael, Lo Yasacheh L'chol Goy, Mishpatim Balidom. The Goyim don't have the Dover, don't have the Chukov Mishpat. So what do they need to do? Gvuras Hasus. Sheikeish, right? That's what we said in Mizmor Lam Gimel. Really, b'Dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasu. So what do you need a sus for? What do you need Rav Chelek? Okay, if you don't have Dvar Hashem, because Mishpatim Balidom, the Goyim don't have the Davar. Only Yaakov and Yisrael does, right? And this is the Davar. This is, of course, the Davar that the Dvar Hashem, the Rav means there's no Davar here. This is the Davar. V'Av V'Shamar as a Davar. This is what the whole, everything's about. This Davar, the elusive Davar, right? Who has the Davar? The Ma'aseh, who has the Davar is Yaakov and Yisrael. Not Goy, and not Balidom, of course, is Pari who's Loyodati. He doesn't have the Davar. So Mela, what does he have? Sus Sheikeish, right? And that's what he has to do. When Yosef, who's allying himself with Pare in the land of Loidavar, of Lo Yasacheh L'chol Goy, right? He's forced to work with Gvuras Hasus and Sheikeish. So he's 30 years old, he's the Koyach, he stands before Pare, and he makes this major plan, right? But what's better, but what does that mean? That means you're working with Mitzrayim, where there is a Rav, because there is a lack of the Davar, but you're saying we could survive the Rav because we could throw enough energy at it, we have a way to survive it, right? We have a plan. While Yaakov was Yirei Hashem, then there is just no Rav at all. So that's the big difference between the 30-year-old and the 130-year-old. The 30-year-old who stands there and says, we'll deal with the Rav, and the 130-year-old can't stand, but he has Yiras Hashem. I'm not saying but Yosef didn't, but you get the point. He counteracts the Rav with the Yiras Hashem. And that, I just want to finish one point. As you said before, Yaakov couldn't do it when he wasn't the full Yaakov, only after he goes down to Mitzrayim, V'atachi Ruach Yaakov Aviyim. So that's why the pasuk says, it's only when Yaakov is united with his children, that's when you have the full Yerushalayim, right? Nidchei Yisrael Lechanes, everyone's together. So Bnei Yerushalayim Hashem Nidchei Yisrael Lechanes. So when is it considered like, okay, Yerushalayim is now in Mitzrayim, and there's not going to be a Rav? It's when they're all together. When Yaakov is mourning at home and Yosef is stuck in Mitzrayim, then there's a Rav, because then you don't have Nidchei Yisrael Lechanes. It's broken. So it's broken, there's a Rav, so you have to use Gvuras Hasus Sheikeish. Okay, yeah, what were you saying?
It seems that normally we say Yosef provided the plan. You're also saying he provided the energy, but the energy he uses is the strength that Pare gives him, right?
Very good. Right. So you're saying that's Sheikeish, that's Gvuras Hasus. Excellent.
You have the plan, and I'll give you the tools. You use that.
Right, but the power, the power is coming from Pare.
Right.
Very good.
Because he's only using Pare's power because he's
very good. Right, very good. Take a look. We said this last week. Take a look in Yeshaya, Perek Lamed Aleph. And now I realize there's maybe even more of a diak there. In Yeshaya, Perek Lamed Aleph, in the beginning, Yeshaya is bemoaning those who descend to Mitzrayim for aid and rely on Susim, right? Instead of looking to Kadosh Yisrael, This is the beginning of Perek Lamed. V'gam hu chacham. Hashem is a chacham. V'yavei ra. And he brings the evil. We spoke about this in Patifera, Kayin Ein. And this pasuk talks about Hashem bringing the ra to the Payale oven. And oven is a kinoi used in Chezkel for the city of Ein, because Ein is really the name of the sun god, I think, is how it goes or something. I forgot. Look at last week's year. And we mechane it to oven. So here it talks about that Hashem doesn't remove his davar, and the next pasuk in Mitzrayim Adam v'loy el. So saying basa v'loy ruach, meaning the reliance on Mitzrayim is to think that they're actually not Adam, right? It's obviously, but we think there's this idea that Mitzrayim is this superhuman, and the horses are spirits, right? So, but really you have to understand that they're just Adam and Basar, and therefore but so just the diak is that I want to add is that no. So first of all, the point you were making that Yosef is relying on the power of Mitzrayim, right? He's taking the power of Mitzrayim and he's putting it into practice. Ki'ilu Mitzrayim is an el and a ruach, which is exactly that's what I spoke of last week, because Yosef, by accepting Pare as ani Pare, which I said mentioned also, what does ani Pare corresponds to Anochi Hashem Elokecha Malchim Mitzrayim? So ani Pare is like he's the God instead of Hashem. Really, Hashem says Anochi Hashem Elokecha Hachach Pichva Maleu. Here Pare is offering all the riches. You come free out of jail, I'm going to make you wealthy, I'm going to make you powerful. Really, Hashem says, I'll give you everything, right? And so on and so forth. So, accepting any Pare and then swearing by Pare is accepting Pare ki'ilu he's a el, which Itaka was. The whole story is that Pare is making himself into a god. That's how it starts. So, therefore, as you said, Yosef is using the might of Pare, and Yeshaya says, hello, the might of Pare is Adam v'lo el, Sas and Bas v'lo ruach. And Mamela, obviously, Sheker has to Sashua, Verchele lo Yamalet, and obviously Lebegruas Sosiach, but Lebesheker Yetze, because it's just a sus, it's just an ish, it's not true power. True power is Reitz Hashem Esireov and Chesed Hashem. Okay, so that's the point. So that's the these two psukim here. That Yosef is 30 when he's oimed lefnei Pare, and Yaakov is 130 when they have to prop him up. He does not have the koyach. He doesn't have the shoykeh ish. I just realized shoykeh ha'ish. Shoykeh ha'ish is how you stand, right? Because it's a very funny pasuk. Shoykeh ha'ish. Okay, we say that. A sus, yeah, sus is power. Shoykeh ha'ish. Okay, so one guy's thighs are very thick, so he's a good wrestler. Maybe I'm underestimating hand-to-hand combat, whatever.
It's also standing up. It's also
but according to it's a perfect what?
How you stand and how you ride the horse.
Interesting. Yeah? With the shake? You need a good shaking to ride a horse?
Yeah, you have to control it.
Interesting. Okay. Shake. Yeah, I hear. But anyways, according to this reference, it's very geshmak why it says shake ish, because right, the way this power that Yosef had is described in the Chumash, which is the inspiration for this mizmor, is that he's oimed lefnei Pare. And like we see in Daniel, you need koich lamid beichlamel. You could be on your feet for 10 hours, whatever. You have to stand there at attention. So you need good shoykeh ish. So that's why this pasuk is saying, no, shoykeh ish.
It's only figurative.
Shoykeh ish.
Yeah,
it's figurative also, of course. And then probably what you're saying is also true about the horse needing shoykeh ish. But it's a very apt reference because it's building off the Amida Lefnei Pare. So therefore it's knocking those shoykeh ish that allowed this Amida, right? And saying, we don't really care about that. We'd rather have Magid V'Rav Yaakov. As I mentioned before, Pare is Mishpatim Ba'idom. It's a reference to Pare. So he doesn't receive this. He doesn't receive. He receives the. He receives the bracha of Yaakov, but not only because Yaakov brings it als Yaakov, right? Mitzrayim doesn't get this bracha when they're acting like Mitzrayim. It's only when there's other shleimus called Yerushalayim, Nitchei Yisrael Lechanis, where the whole Beis Yaakov is back together. That's when you have this Reitz Hashem Esireov, some Yachalim Lechaste.
He also doesn't have to be Omed. He doesn't need to be Omed. He can give the bracha from any position.
Right. Why? Because it's a bracha.
It's bracha. It's
right.
ruach.
Exactly. Right.
It doesn't require energy.
Exactly. Just to remind you, at the end of Paragraph Test, this is a pasuk we spoke about a lot, but at the end of Paragraph Test in Yeshaya, he says, there we have this idea that when Yaakov is together with his children, that's when he gets Bina again. End of Paragraph Test in Yeshaya. Hashem is poide loy ato yevush Yaakov loy ato panav v'chavaru. Yaakov is no longer ashamed. Okay, so when he has his children back together, that's when things are back. That's when everything's fine for Yaakov. So too in Mizmor Kuf Zayin, when he has his banim, that's when Magid Devar of Yaakov. That's when he has the davar. And there also, this we spoke about also, but just to review, in Mizmor Kuf Zayin it says An Meheru Yoretz Devarei, Hashalech Imrasei Aretz, An Meheru Yoretz Devarei, and there it corresponds to the rain. Because the pasuk says, Hashem gives sheleg, right? Sheleg comes from the heavens, like it says in Yeshaya. Kikasha yered agesh of Hasheleg min hashamayim v'sham ken yeh devari. So Yishlach devari, magid devarav, and meheru yoretz devari. Hashem sends His word to the earth. Why? Because the rain and the snow is a mashal for the davar, and it could come down very quickly. So similar, so to the davar, the dvar Hashem comes with a certain speed, with immediacy, right? Yosef said, and there the Mizmor was saying, Hashem makes the rain. Hashem makes the rain. Right? Mitzrayim's power is not from the rain, so it's not from Hashem. Okay? Yeah, it's from the river. But Hashem's word comes mehera. And this is keneged what Yosef told Pare. Ki nochoin hadavar me'emen halikim u'memaher halikim la'asay. And we spoke about this then, that Yosef insisted that it's Nachain, but it wasn't Nachain. Because the fact is that the Rav didn't last 7 years. Yosef predicted there's going to be a 7-year Rav. There wasn't. It was a 2-year Rav. Mm-hmm. Because Yosef's statement, was overturned when Yaakov shows up, and that's when we learn, you know what's Maher? Dvarei. That's what's Maher. At Meher it's Dvarei. And Yaakov gives a bracha, and immediately the Rav is gone. You don't have to spend 7 years to deal with the Rav. You can, the Dvar Hashem has an immediacy to it that Yosef attached that kind of immediacy to a Chalai. And it's like, no. You want the Dover, that's Mehera, that's when Yaakov shows up at Magid Dvar.
Because Yosef doesn't have the full...
Because Yosef doesn't have the full Dover. Because Yosef is in Mitzrayim where they don't have rain, and so maybe they don't understand Yira. What?
Yosef was a dreamer.
Right. Yosef a dreamer means Yosef is going to have Mitzrayim. It's the same, all the same thing. Another thing is also connected to rain because the rain is a mashal for the Dvar Hashem. So Mitzrayim, where there's no rain, they're at great risk of losing Dvar Hashem, right? And they're at risk of not having Yira because they're not toling Shemayim. Okay, and there, by the way, we mentioned this also that it says in Keheles, "V'libcha al yimaher lahotzi davar lefnei helikim ki helikim b'shamayim atal." Oh, it's okay. You do v'cham atim ki ba'ach haloim b'ravinian, right? That Yosef is insisting that there's a mehiros, but if Hashem is in Shemayim, you're in Aretz, and there's no maga, then nothing is guaranteed. You can't be so sure exactly. But only Dvaroi is Mehera, and Mehera is Dvaroi. Only the Davar, and not the Chalaim, and that's only when Yaakov comes. That's when the Davar has an immediate effect, and the bracha brings an end to the Rav based on Yira. Right.
When Hashem is al haaretz.
Right. What?
When you recognize Hashem al haaretz.
Yeah, because he's bringing Yerushalayim. That's Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is Hashem is in the Aretz, and or you have the whole Klai all right there, a minion. That's basically which is Yerushalayim. Yeah. What?
Which is why you have the Navi.
Right, exactly. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to say a few points. Two points on the next pasuk. So that's the Chachma. That's Klula. And pasuk Memvav. I think it's Nifl V'Nair. And then we go to pasuk Mem Zayin. V'ta'as ha'aretz v'sheva shnei hasava likmotzim. In the 7 years of Sava, the Oretz produced Lekmotzim. We'll talk about that soon. But firstly, you have to notice something very strange here, which usually when there's a dream and a prediction, and then it comes true. How does it go? It says, as Yosef said, so it happened, right? It just goes, oh yeah, the 7 years of Sava, right? But if you notice, in Pasuk Nun Gimel and Nun Dalet, there it says the 7 years of Sava ended, and the 7 years of hunger began to come. Kasher Amar Yosef. So there it does make the point that it happened as Yosef predicted. Not over here. This is a right to the Ramban. The Ramban points out on Pasuk Chav Zayin. Chav Zayin, Yosef is interpreting the dream, and he says the 7. I'm sorry, it says Pasuk Chav Vav and Pasuk Zayin. In Pasuk Chav Vav, Yosef says the 7 good cows are 7 years, and Pasuk Chav Zayin, and the 7 bad cows are 7 years of hunger. He doesn't make a point about the 7 years being 7 good years. He says the 7 fat cows are 7 years. The 7 10 cows are 7 years of hunger. Zok Ramban, because Mitzrayim is Gegan Hashem. Mela, it's natural that there's going to be 7 years of Sava. That's not a Chiddush. That wasn't Yosef's Chiddush. Yosef doesn't have to say a Chiddush. You should know, I'm a koich to interpret dreams, there's going to be 7 years of hunger. That's not, 7 years of Sava. 7 years of Sava is the most natural thing. It's the default. It's the default in Mitzrayim. So it's the right. That's why when it says B'sheva Shnei Sava, it really just means normal years. For Mitzrayim, normal years are Shnei Sava. So there was no, so only when the Shnei Rav comes, they say, just tak as Yosef predicted, right? Which, by the way, also something interesting just occurred to me, something to think about. Can you say B'mahar Lakim La'asaysa? If the real chiddush of the dream is the Rav,
and it's going to be 7 years till it happens.
It's going to be 7 years till it happened, right? The first 7 years are not actually really a big deal. I mean, it's very interesting because the first 7 years are only significant even. Let's say you say the 7 years are just regular years of time. So why are they even part of the dream? Because you could capitalize on them. Yeah. It's only because Yosef is going to work with those 7 years that those 7 years become part of the prediction. Very interesting to think about. That might be Stam of Pesach and understanding what's going on, right? The fact that the dream told me about these 7 normal years is telling you that we have to do something about it. And it's only called Memaher because we're going to do something about them, right? But let's say he would have said, it's interesting, let's say I would have said, you guys, let's say Yosef would have just said 7 normal years, we'll say that you should know in 7 years from now, or 8 years from now, whatever, there's going to be a hunger. Right? Not Memaher. Why not Memaher? Let's think about this, just to go like this. Why is it not going to happen quickly? Because we're in Mitzrayim, nothing happens quickly here. The Dvar Hashem doesn't happen quickly here. So that would have, the message would be that you're rochak from the Dvar Hashem and that's your problem. So would have, right? And let's do tshuva, and let's do yira, and let's get a Dvar Hashem that is Memaher. So Yosef said it is, but Yosef said it's quick because Yosef is treating the Sheva Shnei Sava as being part of the dream. Why? Because he's going to deal with it. Im came the first 7 years are also part. So then it's taka happening quickly, right? Because this, I don't know if you realize, when I said before, Ad Meheriot Devarai, Yosef said it's Nochen and Memaher, it really wasn't. It really wasn't Nochen, but the Chayr was Memaher. Right? That has a weak point. And that, it's not me, it's the Psukim. Libchal Yamar L'Hoitzidav L'Fnei L'Kim and Meheriot Devarai. So I said, oh yeah, because Yosef said, Nochen Adav L'Kim and Meheriot L'Kim, and it really wasn't the case. Chayr really wasn't Nochen. Because it wasn't 7 years of hunger, it was only 2. But it was Memaher, as Yosef said it was. That part that Yosef said was true. But according to this... Only because... Right, according to this, very good. Why is it Memaher like Soy said? Because even the first 7 years are part of the message. But why the first 7 years are part of the message? Because Yosef, I'm going to approach it a certain way, such that we capitalize the first 7 years. But really, the real message is Mitzrayim is toast. 8 years from now, Mitzrayim is going to be downfall, and that's not Memaher. Because you can't say a davar if you're far from it. That's very interesting. Okay.
He's trying to take it as a good thing, not
a
bad thing.
He was Memaher l'hoitzidav l'fnei l'kim, right? Exactly. He was over on the pasuk in Keheles that says libcha al yamar l'hoitzidav l'kim ki ba chaloim b'roivinim kol ksil b'roiv dvarim. It's just a chaloim. It's nothing. But he says no. This is a davar. If it's a davar, it's Memaher. And if it's Memaher, that means we're supposed to do something about it. And what we're supposed to do is gruas asos shoykei esh. And meanwhile, this is a big claim he's making because he's trying to make a davar out of Shoykei Ish, and that's what Kuflam Zayin says. No. Magad Rav Liakov, you got to wait for your father to come and Bech Benayich, and that's when we'll have the real davar, right? Which is very interesting stuff if you think about it. If Avav Shomer is a davar, when the davar was when Yaakov came. When did the davar come? It's actually when Yaakov came.
He was hoping that his son would be a Navi.
Right.
Turns out.
Right.
He's the Navi.
It's interesting, right? That's very stomach to think about. The Aviv Shamas Davar, he thought Yais would be a Navi, but it turns out he's the Navi, which you knew read that already. So what? Gets it?
When this Davar is coming,
no.
The comes later.
Yeah, I mean the fact is Yosef enabled a Nevuah in Mitzrayim, meaning because he's Garim that Yaakov should come to Mitzrayim. Somehow that's the Davar of Yosef. That's Yosef's role in Nevuah is to be the bridge.
Yeah.
Think about that. Okay. Anyway, so that's why the puzzle. Okay, this is very deep. This is a very good thing we just realized that that it wasn't actually Memaher. The 7 years were not part of the dream. Sort of yes, sort of not. Right? Because if you look at Pasuk Mem Zayin, it also makes that point. On the one hand, on the one hand, Pasuk Mem Zayin doesn't say, and the 7 years came of Sava as Yosef predicted. Right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it calls them the 7 years of Sava. Right? Sheva Shnei HaSava, the 7 years of Sava. Which sounds to me like we're meaning to say the ones that he was predicted in his prediction. So is it a prediction that you have to say, it came true or not? The answer is it's not, but no, Yosef incorporated it into the dream, and he said, Mamahar. Fine. Okay, it's very interesting. Okay, good. Next, I want to say one thing on the last word in this pasuk, which is a very difficult word, and there's many, when I say difficult, meaning to say there's a lot of pshatim in the farshim. Likmotzim. What does likmotzim mean? So obviously we're familiar with the word of idea of a koimetz, as a handful, but what does a handful have anything to do with this? So I want to say I think 3 or 4 pshatim. Targum says oitzrim. So Rav ben Aramam says they would be koimetz, they would take off, scoop off, to put in the oitzer. Which is very odd because you want to be oitzer things where you scoop with your hands, do oitzer things, right? Okay, the Ramban says likmotzim is like ligmotzim. He has a whole shtickle which oisi skim is chalaf, and it says choifer gumat in Kehalas. You see a bar is called a gumatz, and that's what Targum means. Oitzer means they stored it in these pits that are called gematzim. Gematzim/kamatzim. Okay. Rashi says kamatzim taka means handfuls, and they collected handful over handful. Hand over fist? That's an expression. Yeah. Right. Hand over fist. Okay. Which is also strange because we're talking about tevuah, and we're talking about a lot of tevuah to supply a whole country. Yeah. Right? It's a little strange. But I want to say, going basically with Rashi's pshat, there's one thing to add to this discussion, I think, is a pasuk in Mishlei, Perek Yud Gimel pasuk Yud Aleph. Take a look at Mishlei Perek Yud Gimel pasuk Yud Aleph. Here it talks about how to create great wealth, and it says, "Hain mehavel yimot v'kovetz al yad al yod yarbe." Hain that comes from hevel yimot. So if a person makes hain out of breath, out of nothing, it will eventually decrease. The kovetz al yod yarbe, but if you kovetz one hand at a time, yarbe, that's going to lead to riboy. So here the arts makes likmatzim vayikboitz, and then Yosef collects it, right? Till it got to the point where there was no number for it. Harbe ma'id, right? So the pasuk in Mishnah says, how do you get to harbe ma'id? This is the way you do it, little by little, little by little. So the point is like this. The point is that Yosef wants to get to the point where he has chol chada lispar kims, so he has to have a ton of bar. Kichol hayom harbe ma'id. How do you get to harbe ma'id? How do you get to harbe ma'id? So you have to realize that it's very simple. A little here, a little there. That's his big trick. You come to Mitzrayim and say, we're going to make a harbe ma'id. Where we get harbe ma'id from? Ad kichada lispa. He says, don't worry about it. Every one koimetz here, one koimetz there, and you see it's going to add up. That was his chachma. So the pasuk is saying, likmatzim vayikboitz. Yosef knew how to create hain that's going to last, right? By telling them everything here, that you want to know what makes hain. Hain is made out of a bunch of kamatzim, kovetz al yad, and therefore we could make a hain with that from what we have, right? Makes sense?
Okay, but we know they had a lot anyway. It was Shnei Sava.
Right.
So why is it different than? What's the big chiddush that you're doing yad al yad?
The big chiddush is that I don't think he could sell them. He couldn't sell them. I'm going to come with a truck and take the tour. So as he sold, that's not going to work. He told them, I just want a little bit of each thing. I want a little bit. I'm not sure what the math is here. What? I got what was the percentage, but yeah, it was a chaimish. Right, but the way he sold it to them, I think, was like from each thing, it's just a little bit.
I mean, there's another argument made also that he didn't waste the extras. Because
Took even
have a lot, they have all the extras, sides.
So same thing maybe. So same point maybe. You mean, and that's the pasuk in Mishnah is saying. If you just want to say, oh, it's hein because kacha, I can't. It was just I don't value it, but I just got rich, I got a windfall. Then you're gonna end up losing it. You have to recognize that hein is made up of a bunch of kmotzim, right. And that way you'll preserve it. That way you'll appreciate it. Right? I hear. Because typically it would go to waste in the Sheva Shnei Safa. Maybe it's like so wealthy that we don't care. Right. So by recognizing
all that stuff, all the extras, I'll take it.
Right. No, also right. It's that he's recognizing that wealth is a lot of kmotzim. So therefore, if you understand that wealth is just a lot of small things, then you'll value. Just because you're wealthy, you won't waste the small things. Right.
That's how people become wealthy even now.
Yeah, when they care about the. Can you do it a mice with Warren Buffett in the elevator? Talking to the shir, but maybe it illustrates this pasuk. He was in an elevator with a couple of other gvirim. I don't know if they were like him, but they were. It wasn't me in the elevator with them. It was other fund managers. They walk into the elevator and there's a penny on the floor. So no one picks it up. And Warren Buffett bends over and picks it up. And he says, that's the first of the next billion. He just started his next billion. So that's the Vart. The Vart is right. That kind of wealth comes from realizing that the kmotzim. As they state in the pasuk in Mishlei, and that's what we see over here, where he's kaivitz, and then kaivitz, which of course those two words are associated, kmotzim and kvatzim. Okay, one more pasuk that supports this is in Mishlei Perek Chof Tes, which is, of course, we had numerous psukim in those prakim about Yosef and the stories in Vayeshev, even about Yehuda also. In Mishlei Perek Chof Tes pasuk Gimel, it says, Ish oyev chachma yisamach aviv, v'roi ezaynis yabed hain. So how will Yosef bring simcha to his father Yaakov? By being an ish oyev chachma. And that's what he has to become. He has to become the person who's ish ein navan uchacham kamoicha, and not be a roi ezaynis. And he taka succeeded because he didn't go with the zayna with Eishes Potifar. Because if he would do that, yabed hain, he would have lost the hain. So Yosef's task is to preserve the hain of Mitzrayim. And the way to do that is not to be Zaynis and not to be make Hoin out of Heva, but rather to recognize that Hoin comes from Al Yad, and that's the Kmotzim.